I appreciate it. Thank you. This is, well, I wish our workspace looked like this in the Senate. It's a far cry from it. In fact, you're not even allowed to have electronics on the floor, so that's a whole other matter. Thank you for having me. I want to thank the team at 1776 for having me here today and allowing me to discuss what I believe we need to do as a nation to embrace and encourage the type of innovation occurring here and at similar incubators like it around the country. So over the past couple months, I've presented a vision for bringing America into the 21st century that involves updating the antiquated policies and institutions that are currently holding us back. I'm going to put this here on the side. I know I did it in the past, but not nearly as many people are watching this time. But anyway. So I've discussed 3 avenues of reform that will allow our economy to grow dramatically in this new century. The first is to expand markets for American products and services by actively engaging in today's global economy. That's important, by the way. We're about 5% of the world's population. We can only make so much money and create so many jobs selling to each other. So the more access we have to other people in other markets exponentially grows the opportunities that we have to do that. The second thing that I focused on is trying to make and keeping America the best place in the world to invest. And that's important because that is how jobs and opportunity is created. It's created when someone who has access to money, whether they're borrowing it or they've saved it, they take that money and they risk it to start a new business or grow an existing one. The third avenue is the one that I want to focus on today, and that's the need for new policies that encourage bold innovation. Now, in the last 2 decades, American minds have continued to earn their reputation as the most creative and resourceful on the planet. From the rise of personal computing to the internet to the wireless revolution, our people have been at the helm of the technological transformation that has changed every industry in our economy and every sector of our society. We need to keep it that way, and that's not going to happen on its own. Particularly, Washington continues to cling to the same policy ideas of a century that has come and gone. Earlier this year, I visited Google headquarters a few blocks from here to discuss the importance of keeping the internet free from government censorship and control so that high-tech entrepreneurs such as yourselves continue to have the freedom to develop online businesses and create real-world jobs. A few weeks ago, I visited Uber's new DC headquarters to talk about the need to cut regulations that do nothing but protect established status quo industries and that discourage 21st century online innovations like ride-sharing. Today I want to talk about spectrum reform. Our world has gone wireless, and it did not take long for that to occur. The mobile revolution has changed how we consume media and how we consume content, how we engage with friends and family, and how we learn about the world around us, just in comparison to what it was like a few years ago. We can see it, for example, with students in poor communities who are utilizing free Wi-Fi at the local McDonald's to do their homework. That's actually people I know that do that. We can see it in telemedicine, like the mobile pediatric clinic launched last year in Miami that enables underserved local patients to consult with specialists from the University of Miami health system. They do that using high-speed wireless broadband. And thanks to advancements in sensors and software, as well as the growth in Wi-Fi, the next revolution is already occurring. The Internet of Things is becoming a reality. Consumers can preheat their oven or control their electricity with their phone on their way home from work. While these types of advancements and the pace at which they're occurring are transforming, literally transforming on a daily basis our way of life, they're also leading to very serious policy questions, including issues such as privacy, cybersecurity, and of course patent abuse. But there's one issue related to the mobile revolution that should need no debate, and the one that we should be able to establish a strong consensus on. And that's the need to make more wireless spectrum available to meet the current and the future demands of the wireless economy. All you have to do is look around at the devices being used today, the growth projections for data traffic, and the work being done to connect everything around us. And the common denominator among all of these things is spectrum. It is the lifeblood of the greatest innovations occurring today. And it's simply put, if we don't make enough of it available, future innovations will go unrealized in America, and our economy will miss out on the creation of tens, even hundreds of thousands of new jobs. That's why I'm proposing a wireless innovation agenda with ideas that I believe will ensure that the United States is prepared to face the wireless future. An agenda to ensure that Americans can participate in the wireless economy and take advantage of wireless technology to improve their economic well-being. The first step of this agenda is to make more spectrum available for commercial use. Congress, the FCC, the current administration must continuously look to put spectrum to its best use and to make it available to the private sector whenever possible. The federal government has to be forward-thinking on this. We can't wait until currently scheduled auctions are over. We need to have a series of auctions over several years to provide spectrum in a clear and predictable manner. Now, the Obama administration has been working to identify spectrum for reallocation. That is good news, but more needs to be done. We have to take the next steps and reallocate the spectrum in order to promote innovation and expand broadband access. Now, let me make one point clear, that there's no question the government needs spectrum for services like public safety and national security. You can find the obvious example of that in my home state of Florida. More than 20 of our military bases are using wireless communications to conduct vital operations like launching satellites or conducting air combat training. But spectrum is a finite public access. We must ensure that it is being put to the best and the most valuable use for taxpayers. That's why important measures are in place to protect incumbent systems. It's also why we have incentives such as using auction proceeds to upgrade equipment and improve spectrum use. In addition to reallocating spectrum, we must also implement better transparency and accountability over federal spectrum use. Taxpayers will be better served when the government uses spectrum as efficiently as possible, and when that use is justified, and when the value of that spectrum is clear. The bottom line is that I believe the United States must pursue comprehensive solutions on wireless policy. So this week I'm introducing the Wireless Innovation Act. Here's what this legislation does. First, it reallocates 200 megahertz of government spectrum for commercial use. It establishes an auction pipeline with staggered auctions starting in the year 2018. It incentivizes federal agencies to reallocate spectrum by allowing portions of the proceeds to be used on conducting research and development, as well as cost and technical assessments on reallocating future spectrum bands. It requires an analysis of requests for new or modified frequency assignments to determine whether a commercial service could be used, whether federal users can share, etc. And it requires NTIA to develop a framework to determine the commercial value of the federal spectrum. Now, I know that there are disagreements over how to reallocate spectrum, and there are many ideas on improving federal spectrum use. This bill represents my entrance into this discussion, and I look forward to working with all who are interested to make this better. The second step of the wireless agenda is promoting unlicensed spectrum for Wi-Fi. As we all know, Wi-Fi use is exploding. Unless we act fast, we'll leave consumers without the resources they need to power their increasingly Wi-Fi connected businesses, schools, homes, virtually every aspect of our lives. Therefore, we have to find solutions to expand Wi-Fi use where it makes sense, such as the 5 gigahertz band. The FCC has already taken steps to free up the lower 5 gigahertz bands, but more must be done to expand Wi-Fi elsewhere in the band. In order to do that, we must test these systems. We must identify how Wi-Fi can coexist with incumbent systems, and we must solve harmful interference. We know that important work is being done, for example, by the automobile industry in the upper band. Vehicle-to-vehicle communications has great potential and could dramatically improve vehicle safety. The growth of Wi-Fi and unlicensed use, combined with a decreasing amount of spectrum, means that we have to determine how to utilize this spectrum as effectively as possible. Does that mean sharing? Does that mean exclusive use? Or will Wi-Fi create too much interference? The answer truly is we don't know. But the solution is not maintaining the status quo. The solution is not simply more studies. That's why I'll introduce legislation that directs the FCC to conduct testing in this band and modify its rules to allow Wi-Fi use if the testing shows that there is not a harmful interference to incumbent systems like the ones I've described. This bill will set a timeline and a structure for an evidence-based decision that will happen rapidly enough to address this fast-moving problem. I'm concerned that if we leave government agencies to their own devices, no pun intended, I suppose, we'll be exactly in the same place as a year from now. That's not good enough. There are a lot of smart people working on this issue, and let's get them together and let's work it out. Let's engineer a solution. And that brings me to the third and final component of this wireless agenda. I've talked about the need to reallocate spectrum for commercial wireless use, and I've explained why I believe we need to expand Wi-Fi availability. Neither of these goals, however, can be achieved if there is not sufficient wireless infrastructure in place. Mobile data traffic, for example, is growing exponentially. The Internet of Things will be a reality. Therefore, data has to move faster and coverage capacity has to increase. That means more wireless infrastructure is going to be needed. Government at all levels should not be a barrier to deployment. Confusing statutes and outdated local rules and regulations should not stand in the way of deploying infrastructure or modifying wireless facilities. A small cell should not be subject to the same requirements as a tower. Modifications to a wireless facility should not be subjected to the same rules as when that facility was first built. Local governments should not use review processes to extract fees. They should be used to expedite deployment and connect citizens to 21st century communications. Now, before I came here, before I even served in the Florida legislature, I was actually a city commissioner in a small city called West Miami, 5,000 people. I know how challenging it can be for local governments to move as quickly as providers can move and would like to move. And I know that each city and town have their own priorities and their own ways of doing business. But I also know that some of these processes are delaying deployment. Despite ubiquitous usage of wireless services, there are not ubiquitous rules and regulations for deployment. And the delays are not unique to local government. Not surprisingly, Washington also has a role in this. Wireless service providers have to contend with many different federal agency procedures for sitting facilities on federal property. Despite Congress enacting a provision requiring the General Service Administration to develop and implement a common application form and contract in order to reduce the burdens this places on providers, as well as codify a process set forth in a previous executive order. To date, that solution has not happened. This is a great example of Washington not being up to speed with a fast-moving industry, the wireless industry. For all these reasons, I will introduce legislation to promote the deployment of wireless infrastructure. And this legislation will require action to complete the common application for deployment on federal lands and facilities, and it will update current law to account for today's non-tower structures and the co-location of wireless facilities. As I stated at the beginning of my remarks, the world is not just going wireless, the world has gone wireless. The revolution is going to continue. You can look around this building, you can look around this room, you can look around this floor, I guess, and know that as a fact. So the question for us is, what is the federal government going to do about all this? Are we going to be slow to respond and to rely on slow-moving and outdated policies that will inhibit innovation? Or are we going to put the right statutory and regulatory framework in place that will further this mobile revolution? I hope it's the latter. This will be a critical part of our agenda as we move forward. I actually believe with all my heart that, this is not in the speech, so I just want to share this with you. I believe with all my heart the 21st century can also be an American century. And here's why I believe this. Because everything this century is going to be about is what we're the best at in the world. I honestly believe that as Americans we have a cultural advantage. Our nation, from its very inception, certainly today, is full of people that don't simply accept the status quo. We are always asking, what can we do different and what can we do better? Literally, Americans from a very young age are not taught to simply accept the status quo as fact. We're always asking the questions of why and why not. And that sort of creativity has led us to not just change our country, but to change the world. Look how people all over this world live their lives today. Think about people that have lived in poverty for generations and continents, who now have emerged into more prosperity, not simply because their economy has grown, but because of the innovations that we've created has made it possible for people to do things they could never have done just a decade ago. To acquire learning. Think about farmers that now have access in real time to weather patterns and the latest, greatest techniques in terms of how to make their land more productive. Think about the healthcare applications that it's meant for our planet. And just think about what it's meant for our people. Think about the thousands upon thousands of people in our country that desperately need some form of higher education and learning so they can go from a low-paying job to one that pays them more money. And the opportunity that off-site learning provides for people who have to work full-time and raise a family to acquire that learning. So a receptionist can become a paralegal, or a billing clerk can become an ultrasound technician. These are life-changing innovations that are allowing this to happen to people. And we're on the leading edge of them. The only thing, honestly, holding us back from the 21st century innovations that will also make this an American century are antiquated 20th century structures, institutions, laws, thought processes that hold us back from fully embracing the opportunities of the new century. The industry you're involved in is on the leading edge of it. And I think our job as policymakers is to transition government into the 21st century. Look, government, at least the form of government we have, our republic, will never move as fast as the pace of innovation. But it should at least try to keep up. It should certainly not act as an impediment to staying ahead of the game. And I hope that in 10 years, 15 years from now, if we say the right things, not only will America be the best place in the world to invest, it will continue to be the best place in the world to innovate. And as a result, we will all leave behind what we inherited, the most unique nation in all of human history. So I look forward to talking more about this with you in the moments to come, but thank you for hosting me today on this important topic. And now I'll have some water.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I can't think of a better ending to your remarks to cue off the conversation. And so I have a couple of questions that I want to drill into, but I also want to leave some time for you who joined us today to be able to also ask your questions. So be thinking about the things you might want the senator to address. I want to start with where you ended, which is the opportunity at hand. Our country has long been seen as the center of innovation. We have created many of the innovations that have powered the world, and we continue to be the mecca for people who want to pursue entrepreneurship. So talk intangible, if you can, why the focus on spectrum? There's so many, obviously, macro level issues, but spectrum is really critical to this idea of connectedness. Talk more about that.
So this is actually not a difficult audience to explain it to. You understand spectrum from a technical perspective. You use it every single day. What I've tried to figure out is, how can I best explain this to somebody who isn't involved in this industry, but yet benefits from spectrum every single day of their lives? And the best analogy I've been able to find, many of you use this as well, is a traditional road. Everybody can understand the concept of a road. So if you live in a town that doesn't have a lot of people, or maybe has a population of 5,000 like West Miami, and all you have is a 4-lane road, that might have served you well when you had 5,000 people. Now imagine that town suddenly grows from 5,000 people to 1 million people, but you still only have 4 lanes. It's going to get real congested real fast. You need some additional lanes. But now imagine if of those additional lanes that you build, or additional lanes you have capacity for, 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 are controlled by the government, because they might need it in case there's a fire. So they've got 4 lanes dedicated to the fire department, 3 lanes dedicated to the police, and 1 lane dedicated to the rest of us. That's how I view wireless, the wireless capacity. Everything is going to be on mobile devices. It already is. From your boarding pass to the way your doctor monitors your blood pressure and your blood sugar, all of that's going to require capacity. And a lot of that capacity right now, which is it's a finite resource, as I said in my speech, a lot of it is now controlled by government in inefficient ways. And so what we're trying to do is preserve the need for public safety and public welfare and national security, where certainly spectrum has a valuable role to play for government, but then open up the rest of it for the private sector so that we can encourage innovation in all of the infrastructure that you need, or investment in all of the infrastructure that you'll need for this wireless capability. And in some instances, sharing in places where perhaps government and the private sector can share some of this finite resource. And the key is to make it available so that it stays affordable, the speeds stay reliable, and America remains a better place to innovate. Imagine the opposite of this. Imagine if we continue to regulate this industry with a 20th century mindset. Other countries will now become a better place to be in innovation. It'll just be faster to accomplish it. It'll be easier to do it there than it will to do it here. We used to be able to get away with that stuff 25 or 30 years ago. There were a handful of developed economies in the world, and we were the main one. It's more competitive than ever. There are multiple other countries that have figured out how to rapidly grow their economy, and they will increasingly compete with us. They already do compete with us for investment, and they are now increasingly competing with us for innovation. You can see it in the global competition for talent. This is graduation season. You go to any of our colleges or universities around this country, particularly in the sciences, technology, engineering, and math realm, and you will find that many of the top graduates are foreign graduates who would love to stay in America and take everything they learned and apply it into our economy. Many of them will have to leave our country and go elsewhere, which to me is unacceptable, because if they were 7'2" and could dunk a basketball, you know we're going to keep them. If they could throw 98-mile-an-hour fastballs, you know they're going to stay, right? But if somehow they're incredible innovators, they may or may not get to stay here. And countries target us for that. So these things, if we want to stay on the leading edge of innovation, we can't just take for granted that we're innovative people. We have to have institutions and legal structures in place that allow us to do that. And we also have to have the physical capacity to do it. And spectrum is a big part of it. It is the new road of the 21st century. Because, I'm sorry, the one more point I wanted to make, you used to drive to your appointment somewhere. You're increasingly going to be able to do these sorts of things using wireless technology and wireless devices and the wireless spectrum. And if it's congested, it's going to take you longer to do it, it's going to be more expensive to do it, and in some industries you're going to be less likely to do it here than somewhere else.
So let's talk about that last point in terms of key industries. I mean, we're sitting at 1776. We've got 215 companies here physically and many, many more virtually around the world that are focused on tackling really important global challenges like education and health and transportation and energy consumption and broadly how government engages its citizens. Talk about the opportunity in those arenas, from increasing access to spectrum, the ability to be connected devices, and your perspective on that.
Well, the first thing I'd point out is that most of you who are in business here would not have been able to be in business 20 years ago, 15, 10 years ago. You need a front office, right? You need all sorts of infrastructure that goes with being in business. Let me give you, this is a real world example. When I left the Florida legislature, but before I ran for the U.S. Senate, I came up with this idea. The economy wasn't doing well. I was a lawyer, and I realized that a lot of mid-sized and smaller companies who used to have in-house counsel couldn't afford it anymore. So I came up with this idea. I would be an outsourced in-house counsel. I would go to them and say, I know you don't have an in-house counsel. I will be your in-house counsel. Pay me a flat fee every month, and I'll review the bills to make sure that the lawyers aren't overbilling you. I'll help you interview and hire the right lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't have an office. My office was basically an iPad, a cell phone, and my computer at home. I didn't have a receptionist. I didn't have, my entire company was one person. You couldn't have done that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You just couldn't. You needed an infrastructure in place. Now we have lowered the barrier to entry in creativity as a result of all these developments. So that in and of itself is a unique development. Now you talk about the ability to what are the spaces that this opens up? And again, going back to some real-world examples, I was sitting in the Senate cloakroom the other day, not exactly a center of 21st century innovation, but I was sitting there, and a colleague of mine was going through a crossword puzzle, and he wanted to know, remember Jack Dempsey, the boxer, what was his nickname? And he couldn't figure it out. I figured it out in 8 seconds by going online and looking it up, you know. And how would you have done that 25, 10, even 5 years ago? That's not that's just apply that to your economy, apply that to any segment that you have, apply that in our daily lives. We're almost starting to take that for granted. The ability to access reliable information quickly. We take that for granted today. You can learn about any topic you want within seconds. That was never possible in human history up until the last 5 to 10 years. That's going to have a dramatic and exponential impact on our ability to grow. Instead of wasting 2 hours researching something, you can now spend 5 minutes researching it, and the other 55 minutes actually putting it into use. And then you talk to some of the needs that we have in our country. In the 21st, my parents came here in 1956. You could make it to the middle class as a bartender and a casino and a hotel maid. That's increasingly hard and difficult to do. The only way you're going to make it into the 21st century middle class in America is if you have some sort of advanced learning. It doesn't have to be a 4-year degree, but some sort of advanced learning certified in some way. Think about the impact that wireless technology will now provide people to acquire that sort of learning in a cost-effective, time-effective manner. That didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago. And again, that will be impossible to do unless you have the capacity to do it. So we have now the potential to capacitate hundreds of thousands of Americans with the skills they need for the higher-paying jobs of the 21st century. So all these things are of dramatic impact. I mean, in the realm of public health, you know, what best way to avoid stroke or any sort of other healthcare problem is to constantly monitor your blood pressure or your heart rate or your blood sugar. And again, wireless devices are going to be able to deliver that information in real time to your practitioner so you can identify a health problem before it becomes a crisis, thereby saving our healthcare system hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially prolonging your life and your quality of life.
So you made the point, and I wish I could have tape recorded that comment. This is an excellent quote about the regulations being behind. If you think about the innovations that are being pursued here in centers around the world, the technology enables us to do things that the regulations just are not squared away to handle. It's very reactive and frankly behind the times. Talk about what do we and what do you and other lawmakers at the federal, state, and local, and even international levels need to do? What can we be doing to help you understand that, to help advance the movement in the regulations? Because these types of innovations will not reach their potential without a regulatory framework.
So there are two types of regulatory impediments to innovation. The first is simply they're just outdated. You're trying to deal with, you're trying to regulate a 21st century industry or idea using 20th century concepts. So, treating the internet like a traditional telephony, for example, or something along those lines. That's an outdated way of thinking about something that's completely different from what we used to do. The second, I think more sinister form of regulation is when an established incumbent industry realizes I can use regulations to keep innovative competitors out. And so, for example, imagine if we had passed a law 15 years ago that basically required all movies to be reproduced on either a CD or a VHS cassette. And that's the only thing we allowed, because if you allow people to download, children might get hold of this and they might watch movies that are really bad. So we really can't allow downloading. The only way that you are going to allow people to access entertainment is by going into a retailer and renting a VHS cassette or a DVD so that you have to show your ID and prove that you're old enough to watch that movie. Imagine if we had done that. Blockbuster Video would still be in business, but Netflix would not.
Oh, no House of Cards. Oh, no.
I know, so that sounds like a ridiculous example, but I invite you to Miami, where right now your people's cars are being impounded because they're Uber operators or Lyft operators. It's happening. God forbid we chase like killers or burglars. Let's impound people's cars for basically providing a service that connects an open car to a willing passenger. Meanwhile, if you get to the airport in Miami and you ask a taxi cab driver to take you to my home, which is 10 minutes away, they won't do it. Because the trip's not long enough, there's not enough money in it. And when you get in that cab, you probably, you potentially could get sick by the time you get out. But this is a reality. And this is happening in the 21st century in the most developed economy on the planet because of a local regulation designed to protect medallion holders. It's an outrage, but it's happening. And these are just small, I guess not small-scale examples of your Uber or Lyft, but these are real-world examples of things that are occurring that hold back innovation. And all of those are established industries who use their access to power and government to create regulations that do not allow a competitor to get in their space. I don't mean to monopolize, but I want to use one more example of a place which is even more impactful. We all know what a college degree is. And I have one, many of you have one, and we don't want the value of that to diminish. A college degree basically means you went to an accredited school who is given permission to give you a degree. And then the private sector looks at that degree and says, oh, we know what this is, we'll hire you because we know you sat through X number of credit hours in a classroom and learned. Okay? Now imagine if there was another way of learning. Imagine if I said to you, well, in addition to your classroom experience, you should be allowed to package learning no matter how you acquired it. Life experience, work experience, unpaid internships, skills you just acquired over time, online coursework. Why can't people just package all of that learning from different sources and receive the equivalent of a college degree in an accredited way, or the equivalent of an accredited way? The answer is because of outdated accrediting modes. And guess who the accreditors happen to be? The people who provide the bricks and mortar learning. They don't want competition. They don't want someone else to be able to offer learning the way they do, because it allows them to charge you whatever they want. They don't have any competition. There is no innovation. Some of these universities will say, yeah, we offer online courses. They do. And in many instances, these online courses are more expensive than they used to have in the classroom, which doesn't make sense to me, because they didn't have to build a building to give the course. So again, that's just another example of how existing regulations are used to crowd out innovation and competition.
All right, so I want to make sure we have a chance for anyone in the audience with questions. Raise your hand high. We've got a microphone, so we've got one up front. Up front.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Alan Sari, fellow Floridian. So you've spoken a lot about the public sector, and I'm also new to this idea of the wireless sector, wireless innovation. I understand though that the private sector mainly has 2 or 3 big providers, and that there's kind of a hesitancy to update the infrastructure. For example, I think the CEO of Comcast a few years ago had been told that the Japanese and European infrastructure for Wi-Fi was a lot faster, and he said, well, Americans' infrastructure is fast enough, no need to innovate. And there's actually a bottleneck for industries entering into this particular sector. I was wondering how you thought that could move forward. And my information is kind of old, so is this the right fact? And my second question was, I found what you said about higher education particularly fascinating. If you could elaborate on post-university accreditation, that would be great as well. Thank you.
So on I'm sorry, the second question was on, just elaborate on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just talk to the first part of it. So part of the problem on the private side with carriers or content providers like a Comcast or an AT&T or whomever is the question of the availability of the spectrum. Is the spectrum going to be there for us to be able to provide more capacity? So that's why it's so important to provide the steady stream of auctions, this auction pipeline over a number of years, so that they know that as over the next number of years, X amount of spectrum will become available, because that will incentivize, that provides the certainty people need to say, okay, I'm going to risk it. Let's build more infrastructure, because we know we're going to have the wireless capacity to deliver the product that we're trying to sell. On the higher ed front, the best way to describe that to you is the purpose of higher ed is learning, and particularly the acquisition of skills necessary to become employable. Now, some people like to be lifelong learners or whatever, and there's nothing, I suppose, wrong with that as long as you can pay your bills. But the bottom line is we want to give people access to learning. So here's a real-world example. Okay, when I was in the state legislature, I had my executive assistant, equivalent of a secretary, made about $28,000, $29,000 a year because that's what the state paid her. I didn't decide her salary; the state did. She was a single mom trying to raise her daughter all by herself. $29,000 a year is not a lot of money. She desperately needed to get a raise. No matter how hard she worked, how good she was, there's only so much money she could make because of the skills she had. But she had the opportunity, because the state paid for it and she had a pretty flexible boss, to go to school at night. She became a paralegal. And she went from making $29,000 a year to $52,000 a year. That was a life-changing experience for her and for her daughter and for their lives, because she was able to acquire learning. And she was fortunate. But now put yourself in the place of a home health aide. Imagine now if you are a 29-year-old single mother who's a home health aide making $9.85 an hour. Because it's a business that doesn't pay a lot of money because the rates are capitated. It's a reimbursement-based business. The only way she is ever going to increase her pay is if she can become a nurse or a nurse assistant as opposed to simply a home health aide. How is she going to do that if she has to get up in the morning, take her kids to school, work 8 or 9 hours, pick them up from daycare that probably takes about 50% of her salary, bring them home, make them dinner, help them with homework, put them to bed. It's 11 o'clock at night. When is she going to go to school? Much less drive down to a local campus and sit in a classroom for the next 4 years. A better approach would be to say, look, you're working. And as you work as a home health aide, you're acquiring learning. You're learning stuff while you're there. You should get credit for that. You should also be able to take online coursework. On weekends, at night, these massive online courses, free courses that are available, you should be able to take coursework in that. You should be able to test into proficiency. If she speaks Spanish, she shouldn't have to take a Spanish class. She should be able to test into 6 or 8 credit hours, 3 to 6 credit hours, or whatever it may be. The point is, she should be able to package multiple points of learning, online, in a classroom, in both distance and life and work experience, and someone should be able to package all that learning and say, here is the equivalent of a degree, and it has to be something the private sector recognizes. And that is the only way that now, does that mean we're not going to have 4-year universities and colleges? Of course we are, and a lot of people will continue to do that. But some people can't. And the alternative is leaving them stuck for the rest of their lives making $9.85 an hour. I'll use one more example. This one will be even faster. I know a student that was studying marketing. And in the summer, she got an internship working for McDonald's. The best way to explain her job is, imagine that the Happy Meal was a Barbie Happy Meal. Her job was to make sure that the right advertisement was in the stores, placed in the stores, so that people knew there was a Barbie Happy Meal. That's to me, is more valuable than sitting for 3 months in a classroom and learning about marketing. She actually did marketing. She got 0 credit for that. She had to go and pay on top of that. If you served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, you probably shouldn't be forced to take some coursework on Middle Eastern affairs or conditions on the ground in Iraq, things of this nature. We should be able to certify learning no matter how you acquired it. Just because the learning you acquired was free doesn't mean it's any less valuable than paying someone to lecture you for 3 months. So, I think the ability to learn online on wireless devices is going to be a critical component in providing that learning.
Thank you.
Other question? Also up here in front. Green shirt up here.
Thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
You mentioned Netflix, and so this is just kind of the first point, but I think at a popular hour, Netflix takes about 60% of the bandwidth of the internet in the local area, and also the idea of net neutrality. How do you feel about that? I know that there's some concerns that these large companies coming together are going to clog these traffic lanes that you're talking about. How do you balance not blocking free enterprise, but also keeping the internet open for people to move freely?
Keeping the internet open is critical, and part of that is having the capacity, right? So that you're not eating up the available bandwidth for people to get other content. But the flip side of it is you still want to make that industry the profit margin enough so that you have more participants, people stepping into it. Because at the end of the day, this is not charity, right? I mean, maybe some of you are involved in charity, but most businesses go into business to at least make a profit. I mean, no one goes into business to lose money. So, that's not the purpose of this. You have to make it profitable. My bigger concern, though, and one that I would keep an eye on, is regulating the internet as telephony is a dangerous situation because it sets you up for international control, the way the telephony system is now. And that I do worry about. And this is now something that I don't think is getting nearly enough attention. It got a little bit of attention recently, and it's kind of faded from the screen. But one of the reasons why the internet was only possible in a country like the United States, or at least its innovation was possible here, was because we do have a First Amendment. The notion that you can freely speak and say whatever you want. And sometimes that requires us to hear really stupid things. Oftentimes it requires us to hear offensive things. But the truth is that sort of freedom and respect for free speech has allowed things like the internet and communication to expand rapidly where it would be less or much more difficult to do. There are a bunch of other countries that are functional democracies whose concept of free speech is very different than ours. And while I do believe that we need to develop a multi-stakeholder process for governing the internet, I would be very cautious about pursuing it because we now have anywhere upwards of 40 to 50 countries on the planet that currently regulate and or restrict access to the internet in various forms. It is not a coincidence that the more repressive a country is, the less access they want you to have online. That's not a coincidence. Those things are directly related because access to online content, from entertainment to news, is an empowering tool that allows people for the first time to see truth. One of the issues I've worked on and have tried to develop and see how we can pursue it, and I don't think this has to be partisan in any way, is the U.S. has had a long history of playing a role in broadcasting. Radio Free Europe, Radio Marti in Cuba, places like that. In the 21st century, I'm not sure we should be a content provider anymore. I think one of the things we should be is an access provider, allowing more people to have access so they can read whatever they want. If they want to watch Fox News or they want to watch MSNBC, if they want to read the Wall Street Journal, they want to read the New York Times, they can decide. But there's now so many sources of information that are empowering to people. And one of the things that we need to always be on the side of is providing more access. So the one thing that does make me concerned in those conversations is if you treat the internet or things like the internet like telephony, you really open the door for international regulations in a way that I think all of us would be very uncomfortable with moving forward.